Disclaimer. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is based on historical sources and interpretations, and is not intended to promote any political ideology or viewpoint. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1787, the United States was on the edge of collapse. This is not an exaggeration. It is not a dramatic metaphor. It is a historical fact that many Americans today rarely stop to consider. Just a few years earlier, the colonies had won a war against the most powerful empire on earth. Independence had been achieved. Freedom had been declared. But what came after the victory was something far more difficult than war: governing. The American Revolution had created a nation in name, but not in structure. What existed was not a strong country, but a fragile alliance of states, each suspicious of centralized power, each guarding its own interests, each unsure whether the experiment called the United States could actually survive. The future of the nation did not depend on another battlefield. It depended on a quiet deal, a deal made behind closed doors. A deal few citizens knew about at the time. A deal whose consequences still shape American politics today. This is StateWhisper. To understand why this deal mattered, we need to understand how weak the United States really was in the years after independence. In 1781, the Articles of Confederation officially went into effect. This document was America's first attempt at a national government, and it was intentionally weak. The founders feared tyranny more than chaos. They feared another king more than they feared collapse. As a result, they created a federal government that could ask states for cooperation, but could not demand it. Congress had no power to tax, no power to regulate interstate commerce, no standing army to enforce its decisions. If Congress needed money, it had to politely request it from the states. Most of the time, the states simply refused. Each state printed its own money. Each state set its own trade rules. Some states taxed goods coming from other states as if they were foreign countries. The result was economic confusion. Merchants struggled to trade across state lines. Currencies fluctuated wildly in value. Debts from the Revolutionary War went unpaid. Soldiers who had fought for independence returned home to find their government unable or unwilling to compensate them. For ordinary people, this wasn't an abstract constitutional problem, it was daily life. Farmers faced foreclosure, veterans faced poverty. Families worried not about liberty, but about survival, and slowly, quietly, something dangerous began to grow: doubt that the United States could last. By the mid-1780s, political leaders across the country were deeply concerned. Not because of foreign threats, but because of internal instability. The Union was holding together not by law, but by habit. And habits fade. States ignored congressional decisions. Treaties were violated. Foreign governments questioned whether the United States could be taken seriously at all. Even George Washington, who had willingly stepped away from power after the war, began to worry that the nation he helped create might dissolve. But the true warning sign did not come from politicians. It came from farmers. In 1786, in western Massachusetts, economic pressure finally exploded into open revolt. Daniel Shays was a former Continental Army officer. Like many veterans, he returned home after the war with little money and significant debt. High state taxes and aggressive debt collection pushed farmers to the brink. Courts began seizing land. Farms were lost. Families were ruined. So they fought back. Armed farmers shut down courthouses. They demanded relief from taxes and debt. They demanded a government that listened. This uprising became known as Shays Rebellion. And here is the critical part. The federal government could do nothing. There was no national army to restore order. No federal authority to intervene. Massachusetts had to rely on privately funded militias to suppress the rebellion. 2 leaders across the country, this was terrifying, not because the rebels were evil, but because the government was powerless. George Washington wrote privately that the rebellion showed the nation was fast verging to anarchy. James Madison warned that without reform, the Union would not survive. Shays Rebellion was not just a local uprising, it was proof that the system was broken. By 1787, the idea of reforming the government could no longer be ignored. Delegates were invited to meet in Philadelphia. Officially, their mission was simple: revise the Articles of Confederation. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. The Articles were beyond saving. What was needed was something entirely new. And so, in May of 1787, representatives from 12 states gathered in secrecy. Rhode Island refused to attend, fearing centralized power. The doors were closed, windows were shut, guards were posted. Nothing discussed inside was meant for public ears. Inside the Pennsylvania State House, tension filled the air. Delegates did not agree on much. They argued constantly. They distrusted one another. Some suspected others of plotting dominance. Large states wanted representation based on population. Small states feared being swallowed by their neighbours. Northern and southern states clashed over trade and slavery. Some wanted strong executive power. Others feared creating a new king. James Madison spoke often. He took detailed notes, fully aware that history might depend on what happened in that room. Benjamin Franklin, en frail, rare, Benny did. His words carried weight. He reminded the delegates that perfection was impossible and compromise was necessary. Day after day, the debates continued. At times, the convention nearly collapsed. The most dangerous conflict centred on representation. Large states wanted power proportional to population. Small states demanded equality. Neither side would back down. The solution came in the form of what we now call the Great Compromise. It was elegant and deeply political. One chamber of Congress, the House of Representatives, would reflect population. The other, the Senate, would give every state equal representation. No side fully won. No side fully lost. Similar compromises followed. The 3/5 compromise tied representation to slavery. The Electoral College was created as a buffer between the people and the presidency. These decisions were not moral victories. They were survival strategies. They were whispered agreements designed to keep the Union alive. When the Constitution was finally presented to the public, debate exploded. Some feared tyranny. Others feared chaos. Federalists argued the new system was necessary. Anti-federalists warned it gave too much power to the central government. The Constitution was ratified narrowly, not unanimously, not peacefully, but it was ratified. And with it, the quiet deal became law today. The Senate still gives small states outsized power. The Electoral College still shapes elections. Federalism still defines. American politics, these are not accidents. They are the legacy of compromise. The United States did not survive because it was perfect. It survived because its leaders were willing to make difficult, imperfect deals in silence. Power rarely announces itself. It whispers, and sometimes those whispers shape centuries. This was StateWhisper. Created and narrated by StateWhisper, original script and production